So, interpretation and translation are similar in that they both involve taking the source language message into a target language message. Um, they both require competencies, fluency in both the source and target language, um, decent ELK, understanding of the setting and the situation. But there are some differences as well. Interpretation is in the moment, and translation has more time to go back and revise before presenting or turning it in. Interpretation has a higher risk of error because it's in the moment and because there's time to go back and interpret and because or edit, excuse me, and because there's usually a lot more going on around you, whereas in translation you can go and find a quiet room to do it by yourself. So developing translation skills first will help you to master the language and the transfer skills necessary to interpret. And then once you've learned translation, you can focus on focusing through distractions. You can focus on being receptive and expressive at the same time when you need to do simultaneous interpretation. And all of that once you've learned how to take a message from the source language into the target language in translation. So the concepts of one-to-many and many-to-one and many-to-many are when there is a disproportionate number of options for translation. So one-to-many is when there is a single word for a concept in the source language that could be theoretically translated into a couple different words in the target language. And then many-to-one is the opposite, where there are a whole bunch of different words for the same thing or a very similar thing in the source language that can all only be encapsulated by this one word or phrase in the target language. And then many-to-many is same thing, but lots of different options in both the source and target language. This is important for a translator to know because knowing your audience and knowing which word they're likely to use, even if multiple words could theoretically service in that particular sentence, is going to help with audience retention and audience understanding. So knowing your audience and knowing that while there might be a lot of options, they might not all be equal, given the audience, given the ELK, given the subject matter. One of those options might be better than another. So the preparation phase is when you are getting everything that you think you might need in order to translate. So this is the part where you do research to pad your ELK. This is the part where you learn more about the subject matter, where you do background research. This is the part where you look up vocabulary words and translations that you think you might need at some point in the translation. So this is really, really important because the more you understand about the subject matter, the more you understand the vocabulary and the jargon, the easier it's going to be to do the translation, but then the more accurate the translation is going to be because you're going to know how to recognize whether something is worded correctly. Risk of error is how much of a risk, how likely it is that an error is going to occur, and how bad it would be if that error did occur. it's important to understand risk of error, because when you know that there is a risk that you're going to mess up, and you know what would happen if you did, you can be on the lookout for your own weak spots, and you can take action to preemptively prepare as much as you possibly can. So in scenario 1, the defendant in a criminal case has a sign name that's very similar to the sign for the word guilty. So the defendant accidentally pleads guilty when they were intending to address themselves to the court. So the issue with that is, obviously, the risk of error there is that an innocent person goes to jail for conceivably a very long time. That's really bad. That assignment has a very high risk of error. The way to avoid that would have been to expand on the question, kind of explain what a plea is ahead of time, which is usually done in court anyway, and give all of the options, not just are you guilty, but how do you plead, guilty or not guilty, is usually how it's worded. So it's a little weird that the interpreter just said, are you guilty? And because that phrasing has fewer options and doesn't indicate to the man on the stand that it is a choice, that there are multiple options here, and what these options are, it increased the risk of error because the interpreter didn't make it clear the nature of the question. So the Nida and Tabor model of translation is fairly straightforward on the surface. You have a source message, it transfers, there it is in the target language. Gilles' model, however, works back on itself a little bit. Gilles has a few steps for stop, analyze, is this working? Does the target language message match the source language message? So while Gilles' model is a little bit more back and forth, the Nida and Tabor model is just straight ahead. Which doesn't instill the habit of self-evaluation that's necessary in translation the way that Gilles' model does. And understanding these models helps to recognize where in the process you might be having a problem. If you understand that there is a process and this is what the process is, being able to say, this is where I'm breaking down, helps you to focus on that, and you're more likely to improve on that area rather than just saying, wow, okay, I need to work on translation. That's a really broad subject, and if you start just randomly working on your translation skills, you might not be working on the area that actually needs working on. So before you start translating word for word, analyzing the grammar level of the text is really important because it's going to tell you about the register, it's going to tell you about the intended audience. It's going to tell you the tense, it's going to tell you what is being emphasized. It's going to give you a lot of information that just going word by word isn't. And you're going to want to match the register and the intended audience that are alluded to in the grammar. And you can't do that if you're going word by word because you're not taking the text as a whole. So when you take the text as a whole and you analyze the grammar in addition to the word choice, you start to learn things like who is the intended audience, what is their register, how much might they know about this topic, and that's going to help you pick a word when you're struggling in a translation, saying, is this a word my audience is going to understand? Do they have the necessary ELK to understand this word? Does this word fit in in the context of the text as a whole? And does this fit with the register of the text, and have I changed it up from how I've been translating it up till now? So illocutionary force is the intent behind a text. Illocutionary force is what the author was trying to do. Is the text persuasive? Is the text angry? Is the text trying to condemn? Is the text trying to encourage? Is the text trying to educate? All of that information is going to tell you word choice, it's going to tell you register, it's going to tell you how to conjugate verbs. Pretty much everything about how you would interpret is based on why this is being written in the first place. Why does this text exist is going to tell you a lot about how to translate it. And that's what illocutionary force is. Illocutionary force is, why is this text like this? What is the text trying to do? So in Carolyn Jotley's presentation, we worked for a little while on trying to come up with our own model of translation that works for us. A lot of the models that we came up with were some sort of like grab bag of different parts from other models that we've studied so far. And while I think mine is not necessarily super helpful to me, the idea that I can take what I need from different models and that the way that my brain does interpretation and translation is going to be a little bit unique and I should tailor it to that was really helpful. And being able to go forward thinking, okay, how can I use this? How can I associate it with the way that my brain works? And going into this field thinking, okay, I'm going to need to start making my own thing from all of the other information that I'm gathering was very helpful. So non-evaluative language is when you look at work separate from the worker. That's when you say, was this effective? Not, was it good? This was a bad translation is talking about the translator. Saying this translation was ineffective is talking about the translation. What's great about that is that evaluative language a lot of times is very static. That this is bad. The end. It's always going to be that way. Whereas non-evaluative language, this was ineffective, begs the question, well, how do we make it effective? It's something that can be worked on. So that encourages introspection, and it encourages thinking about the work itself, and always with a mind toward improvement. It also helps stave off burnout if you start associating yourself with the outcome of your work and hinging your self-worth on that. You're going to burn out really quickly. But being able to separate your sense of self from the work is crucial here, because that way you can continue to improve without the fear of burning out before you do. So the biggest takeaway that I got from Ashley and B's presentation was definitely the part about imposter syndrome. I have had that problem my whole life. The second I decided I wanted to be an interpreter, there was a part of my brain that was like, nope, you're never going to get there. You're never going to be good enough to do that. Knowing that it's a fairly common experience among interpreters is really helpful. It's also a tool, that knowledge. I can take that forward and use it as a kind of defense against those inevitable feelings that I know I'm going to continue having. When my brain tells me, nah, you're never going to be good at this, I can remind myself, well, no, see, Ashley and B said everybody feels this way, and they're interpreters now, and they're great at it. So knowing that, having that foreknowledge is really helpful, because I can combat the negative self-talk, and I can combat the imposter syndrome by saying, no, other people have acknowledged this. This is common, doesn't mean it's correct. So I'm really glad I know that.